Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, November 18th. We start tonight in Thailand, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is wrapping up his time at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Now, this is where he announced an investment in Canada's military presence in the region. He says his government's long promised Indo Pacific strategy is set to include a renewed focus on the Canadian Armed Forces' role in the region and ways to help ensure peace is upheld for all of Canada's allies. The move comes after North Korea launched a ballistic missile into Japanese coastal waters. Now, this prompted concern from U.S. officials and other allies. Back at home, the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act continued today. The federal government's Deputy Secretary on Emergency Preparedness says Cabinet was presented with many options to handle the Freedom Convoy protesters who were blockading the streets of Ottawa and several border crossings. Jacqueline Bogdan says Cabinet had an ever-expanding menu of options to help resolve the growing protests across the country last winter. Now, she says once it became clear that protesters did not plan to leave downtown Ottawa, several cabinet ministers convened. This was to review what the federal government could contribute to end the blockades. Meanwhile, Health Canada officials say a large foreign supply of children's ibuprofen and acetaminophen is expected to start showing up on pharmacy and retail shelves next week. They say 1 million bottles of children's medication will have been distributed to hospitals, pharmacies, and retailers after next week. Hospitals, pharmacies, and parents with sick kids have been grappling with a shortage of children's Tylenol and Advil since spring. In fact, it was exacerbated by the early appearance of influenza and respiratory syncytial virus, along with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Parents across Ontario may have to wait this weekend to hear whether schools will be closed next week as a possible education workers' strike looms. The Canadian Union of Public Employees says more than 50,000 workers are set to walk off the job on Monday. Now, this if a deal isn't reached with the government by Sunday at 5 p.m. Several school boards have said learning will move online if workers go on strike again. This comes 2 weeks after their last walkout ended. On the West Coast, BC's David Eby took the oath of office today, becoming the province's 37th premier during a ceremony in Vancouver. Mr. Eby replaces the outgoing New Democrat premier John Horgan, who announced last June that he was leaving office due to health concerns. The swearing-in ceremony was conducted on the traditional territory of the Musqueam First Nation, with Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin leading. Right after being sworn in, Mr. Eby announced a $100 cost of living credit. This will be for residents for their electricity bills. He also established a BC affordability credit for low and middle income people. First Nations leaders in Alberta say that they stand in solidarity against Premier Danielle Smith's planned sovereignty legislation. The chiefs of Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 say they will work together to oppose the bill and its Alberta First agenda. Alberta's Justice Minister has said the Sovereignty Act will challenge unconstitutional federal encroachments on areas of provincial jurisdiction. The Canadian Armed Forces is banning soldiers from wearing their uniforms and medals in civilian courts. The new regulation bans military attire from non-military trials, except in certain circumstances. It follows the outrage over Major General Danny Fortin's decision to wear his uniform and medals during his sexual assault trial in civilian court. Defense Department spokesman Daniel Lee Boutillier acknowledged in a statement that the military decided to review its existing policy following concerns expressed in September. Looks like Russia's invasion of Ukraine will be top of mind at the Halifax International Security Forum this weekend. The annual event attracts politicians, academics, experts, and military brass from around the world. All right, staying in the East, where a New Brunswick teen who has cancer got his wish to meet Ryan Reynolds. Make-A-Wish New Brunswick says in a Facebook post that 17-year-old Ryan Burris visited the Canadian actor earlier this month. Now, this was on the set of his new movie in New York. The post says Mr. Burris glowed with excitement as he got an exclusive tour of the set by Mr. Reynolds and spent the day getting to know his favorite actor. The foundation called it a transformative experience that restored Burris's hope for brighter days ahead. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at more news from across the country. We'll have more on the flu epidemic, dental benefit, and weather right after the break, so stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. The Canadian Pediatric Society is calling for families to make sure they're up to date with their flu shots. It says the advice is even more pressing for families with young children. This comes as the rapid spread of respiratory illnesses puts a strain on children's hospitals. The organization says children under the age of 5 and those with chronic health conditions are more likely to need hospitalization if they catch the flu. Earlier this week, public health officials reported the start of the flu epidemic, with levels of influenza being higher than in previous years. Well, this comes as children's hospitals in Nova Scotia are seeing historically high patient numbers. The head of pediatrics at the largest children's hospital in Atlantic Canada says kids are coming in sick with respiratory illnesses. Dr. Andrew Link says that Halifax's Children's Hospital, IWK Health Centre, is seeing sky-high patient numbers, which are higher than he's experienced in his more than 30-year career. Dr. Link says this is the result of a perfect storm of COVID-19, respiratory syncytial virus, and influenza. Moving to Manitoba now, which still has the highest COVID-19 risk in Canada. The province is at a severe COVID-19 threat level for the third consecutive week. This is according to combined hospitalization and wastewater estimates. Tara Moriarty is co-founder of the COVID-19 Resources Canada Research Group, and she says recent spikes in transmission of the virus in Manitoba follow surges in Ontario and Quebec. The Manitoba government says it will issue a combined COVID-19 and respiratory virus report later today. All right, meanwhile, in Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith is scrapping the governing board of its health service and replacing it with an administrator. She announced yesterday that Dr. John Cowell is taking over the duties of the Alberta Health Services Board. The AHS change is part of Ms. Smith's multi-pronged plan to reform healthcare, and it starts with no restrictions or mandates for future COVID-19 outbreaks. Switching gears to a new report commissioned by the Quebec government, which has uncovered signs of violence and negligence at two privately owned long-term care homes in Montreal. The report is by a retired health department employee. It alleges abuse in all its forms at Les Résidences Floralie locations in Lachine and La Salle boroughs. Residents were found with untreated sores, dehydration, and signs of violence, such as bruises. And the report found that there is little place to prevent falls or address dementia-related behavior. A new dental benefit will be available to low and middle-income families as early as December 1st, while the federal Liberals work to create a dental insurance program. Families can apply for up to $650 per child under the age of 12. Now this, if they have a household income lower than $90,000 and no private insurance. Senators passed the bill on Thursday, which also includes a one-time housing benefit of $500 for low-income renters. The bill requires royal assent before it is signed into law. Women CEOs are still a rarity in Canada, but companies like Calgary tech firm Benevity are working to change that. Benevity's CEO, Kelly Schmidt, is one of 5 women on the company's 9-person executive team. 54% of Benevity's total workforce are women, and 59% of promotions at the company in the last year went to women. In Canada, only 5% of publicly traded companies in 2022 had a female CEO. A report from McKinsey & Company says women are as likely as men to want to be promoted and aspire to senior-level roles. But the report says women leaders are more likely than men to face headwinds related to gender or being a parent. Back in Manitoba, the provincial government wants to do away with seasonal time changes and move to permanent daylight time, but only if the United States leads the way and the idea gets public support. Municipal Relations Minister Eileen Clark introduced a bill in the legislature yesterday. It will let the province ditch the annual ritual of moving clocks forward an hour in March and back an hour in November. The aim, she says, would be to stay in sync with trading partners south of the border if the U.S. adopts permanent daylight time. Ms. Clark says Manitobans will be consulted about the idea early next year. Residents in parts of southern Ontario are encouraged to postpone non-essential travel this weekend. Now, this is due to snow squalls that could bring up to 80 centimeters of snow to some regions. Environment Canada says local snowfall amounts will range between 50 to 80 centimeters by late Sunday. The weather agency is warning that the prolonged period of snow squalls may reduce visibility to almost zero. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at the big moves and changes in the crypto world. We'll be joined by Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. Forum Daily's weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, is up next. All yours, Catherine. Take it away.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, the big story in crypto and digital assets continues to be the collapse of FTX, which, of course, was the $32 billion crypto exchange. It has caused absolute chaos within the digital asset world. The new CEO of FTX, in charge of liquidation, was also in charge of the liquidation of Enron. He has said that the bankruptcy of FTX is the worst case of corporate failure he has seen in more than 40 years. He goes on to say, and I quote, "Never has such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as he's seen." He goes on to say in a court filing that FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried's Alameda Research Trading Company had compromised systems integrity and also faulty regulatory oversight and a concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals, and that the company used software to conceal the misuse of customer funds and gave special treatment to Alameda. Keep in mind, of course, as well, that what's taking many investors by shock and surprise is that FTX's founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, had the ability to raise billions of dollars from some of the smartest top-tier VC firms in the world, such as Sequoia, as well as SoftBank, among many others. Importantly as well, when we think about the fallout here, there are futures products within Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And of course, futures are a way to express your belief about future pricing and future value. Interestingly here, the futures price, the 1 month Bitcoin futures price, is trading at about a 3.6% discount to current spot prices. That is indicating severe negative sentiment within the space. If you actually annualize 3.6%, you get 43%. So again, signaling severe negative sentiment within cryptocurrencies. This, of course, reflects FTX's collapse, which was, prior to all of this, the third largest crypto exchange in the world. And the concern, of course, continues to be, will this prolong the crypto winter, which we've been experiencing for almost a year? And we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Now, from a trading perspective, just as it relates to future prices versus spot prices, the difference that you're seeing in the disconnect is attracting a lot of arbitrage players. So you are actually seeing quite a bit of activity within that space. Now, as contagion spreads, one of the fallouts of crypto is the cryptocurrency lender BlockFi. We did talk a little bit about this last week. They apparently are preparing for bankruptcy, according to people familiar with the situation. And last week, we did note that they were halting withdrawals of customer deposits. BlockFi, it turns out, has been quite intertwined with bankrupt FTX. In a blog on Monday, they said that they had significant exposure to FTX and Alameda, including loans to Alameda and its assets at FTX. And as of 2021, BlockFi had apparently between $14 and $20 billion of customer deposits, had lent out about $7.5 billion. Again, that is according to people familiar with the situation. In terms of other people being impacted, other companies, recall the billionaire Winklevoss twins, made famous, of course, by their fight with Mark Zuckerberg in terms of who founded Facebook and who owned Facebook. Well, following Facebook, they actually moved on to be very, very successful within the cryptocurrency space. They created a company called Genesis, and they are apparently halting lending redemptions. This is as the withdrawals exceed the liquidity, but this is only with specific to that one product, not any of their other products, apparently. Of course, you might be asking, where are the regulations? That's what we've been talking about for quite some time. And there has been a number of lawmakers collectively calling for crypto control and to have some type of regulatory framework urgently needed, obviously. And Congressman Brad Sherman, in fact, said that a lack of regulatory clarity was a key reason why the situation that occurred at FTX was able to occur. Lastly here, stepping aside from all the FTX fallout, merchants who accept payments in stablecoin USDC can now interact with Apple Pay. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. All right, stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Stay tuned. North Korea has fired an intercontinental ballistic missile that showed a potential ability to launch nuclear strikes on North America. The missile landed near Japanese waters today in its second major weapons test this month. The United States quickly slammed the launch, and it is vowing to take all necessary measures to guarantee the safety of its mainland and allies, South Korea and Japan. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris called a meeting with leaders of Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada to discuss the North Korean threats. Already heated tensions in Iran escalate after a mother blamed the death of her child on shootings by security forces. A large anti-government protest erupted at the funeral for the child. It is the latest in a wave of demonstrations that have flared across the country over the past 2 months. Videos circulating on social media showed hundreds of protesters at the funeral on Friday. The nationwide protests began after the September 16th death of a 22-year-old woman who was being held by Iran's morality police. It quickly escalated into calls for an end to 4 decades of clerical rule. A Swedish prosecutor says investigators found traces of explosives at the Baltic Sea site where the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines ruptured in September. The 2 natural pipelines were damaged in what he called an act of gross sabotage. Mats Ljungqvist of the Swedish Prosecution Authority said Friday that the investigators carefully documented the area. The parallel undersea pipelines run from Russia to Germany. Well, as the COP27 summit draws to a close, one country is looking to continue its fight against the impacts of climate change. Dozens of nations, spearheaded by island nation Vanuatu, say they will seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. This will be on the legal obligations of countries to protect people who suffer from the impacts of climate change. Vulnerable nations and other states, including New Zealand and the Alliance of Small Island States, are supporting the move. The head of Europe's central bank is warning that interest rates may continue to rise. The president of the European Central Bank is warning that the bank may have to raise interest rates beyond merely withdrawing stimulus and into territory that could restrain growth. The ECB has raised rates at the fastest pace in its history, this to combat record inflation that hit 10.7% in the Eurozone in October. Twitter continues to make headlines after its takeover by Tesla billionaire Elon Musk. The social media platform is losing engineers and other workers even faster than before. Now, this comes after new owner Elon Musk gave them a choice: either pledge to a hardcore workday or resign with severance pay. Hundreds of employees signaled that they were leaving ahead of yesterday's 5 p.m. deadline. They signed off officially from the company's internal Slack messaging board. The newest round of departures means the platform is continuing to lose workers just as it's gearing up for the World Cup. The tournament, one of the busiest events on Twitter, could overwhelm its systems if things go haywire. Well, speaking of the World Cup tournament, a recent move by Qatar will see it ban the sale of beer at World Cup stadiums, and it comes just 2 days before the opening game. It's a sudden U turn on the deal that the country made to secure the soccer tournament, and a sign of the tension of hosting the event in the religiously conservative emirate, where the sale of alcohol is heavily restricted. It's also a significant blow to World Cup sponsor Budweiser, and it raises concerns about how much control FIFA retains over the tournament. When Qatar launched its bid to host the tournament, the country agreed to FIFA's requirements of selling alcohol in stadiums. Well, there's more bad news from Ticketmaster for Swifties hoping to snag tickets to the superstars' American tour dates. Ticketmaster says it is canceling today's planned general public sale of Taylor Swift concert tickets. Now, this is because it doesn't have enough inventory. The ticket seller couldn't handle the millions of fans trying to buy tickets for the stadium tour as the site crashed and left fans empty handed. An imprisoned Russian opposition activist has been honored by human rights and advocacy group UN Watch. Vladimir Kara-Murza dedicated his award to the thousands of people who have been arrested or detained in Russia for protesting the war in Ukraine. His wife accepted the award on his behalf during a ceremony on Thursday. Mr. Kara-Murza was jailed in April under a new law that criminalized spreading what authorities deemed false information about Russia's military. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.